"You're a joke!" Judge Harrison's voice boomed across the Atlanta courtroom, his finger pointing accusingly at Emily Donovan. The simple woman in her gray sweater stood silently, eyes downcast, as lawyers snickered. Little did they know, beneath her modest appearance lay the mind of a former legal prodigy. When the gavel struck again, Emily raised her head, opened her worn leather binder, and said 6 words that froze the blood of every attorney present. "Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit C." What happened next left the entire courthouse speechless and changed Georgia property law forever. The morning sun filtered through the faded curtains of Emily Donovan's kitchen in Atlanta's historic Summerhill neighborhood. At 34, she moved with quiet purpose, preparing her morning tea in the modest 2-story home that had belonged to her grandmother and her great-grandmother before that. The house wasn't fancy. Worn wooden floors, walls that needed fresh paint, and furniture that told stories of generations. But it was home. Emily smoothed down her simple gray sweater and checked her reflection in the small mirror by the door. Her dark hair was neatly pulled back in a practical bun, her face free of makeup. She looked nothing like the sharp-suited attorney she'd been 5 years ago at Caldwell and Barnes, one of Atlanta's most prestigious law firms. "Just another day," she whispered to herself. A ritual that had carried her through the hardest times. The certified letter had arrived 3 months ago. Peachtree Development Corporation wanted her house and 19 others on her street to build luxury condominiums. The letter offered what they called fair market value, a sum that reflected nothing of the home's true worth to Emily or her community. While her neighbors panicked, many already signing away their properties, Emily had quietly begun her research. The development company had powerful connections, including Judge Harrison, who would oversee her case today. But Emily had something they didn't expect: the truth. She picked up the worn leather binder from her kitchen table. Inside were documents she'd spent weeks gathering from county records, historical archives, and her own family's papers that told a different story about Summerhill than the one Peachtree Development was selling. Her phone buzzed. A text from Miss Gladys next door. "We're all praying for you, honey. Stand strong." Emily smiled. At 82, Miss Gladys had lived in Summerhill her entire life. Her house was already in escrow with Peachtree, but she still believed Emily might save the neighborhood. Walking onto her porch, Emily surveyed the street she loved. Mr. Jameson, watering his prized roses, the Washington kids racing to catch the school bus. And across the way, the community garden she'd helped establish after leaving her law career behind. This modest life wasn't what she'd planned when she graduated top of her class from Emory Law, but it had given her something her former career never could: purpose. As she walked toward the bus stop, a sleek black SUV slowed beside her. The window rolled down, revealing Thomas Caldwell himself, silver-haired partner of her former firm. "Emily," he called. "It's not too late to accept their offer. You're fighting a losing battle." Emily nodded politely. "We'll see about that, Mr. Caldwell. Have a good day." As the SUV pulled away, Emily gripped her binder tighter. They thought she was just a simple woman fighting progress. They had no idea what was coming. The Fulton County Courthouse loomed large against the Atlanta skyline, its stone columns and grand steps designed to intimidate. Emily had once climbed those steps with confidence, designer briefcase in hand. Today, she clutched her worn leather binder and took a deep breath before ascending. Inside, the marble lobby echoed with important footsteps. Attorneys in $1,000 suits huddled with clients, speaking in hushed, assured tones. Emily found a quiet bench and reviewed her notes one last time. Her case was simple. Summerhill qualified for historic preservation. Under a little-known amendment to Georgia's Property Act, of 1998. "Well, look who it is," a familiar voice drawled. Emily looked up to see Rebecca Wellington, junior partner at Caldwell and Barnes. They'd started at the firm together, shared late nights preparing cases, celebrated each other's wins. That was before. "Hello, Rebecca," Emily said calmly. Rebecca's eyes swept over Emily's simple clothes, her lack of makeup, the scuffed shoes. "I heard you were representing yourself. Couldn't afford an attorney on—" She paused. "Whatever it is you do now?" "I grow vegetables and teach community law workshops," Emily said, standing to meet Rebecca's gaze. "And I know enough to represent myself." Rebecca laughed, pearl earrings catching the light. "Emily, be reasonable. You're up against our entire legal team and Judge Harrison, who, between us, plays golf with Mr. Peachtree every Sunday." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "The development is already approved. Today is just a formality." "Then I suppose you have nothing to worry about," Emily replied. Rebecca's smile faltered slightly. "Look, for old time's sake, take the offer. It's generous. It's not about the money." "It's always about the money," Rebecca said, her professional mask slipping momentarily. "Why else would you throw away a partnership track to live like this?" Before Emily could respond, the courtroom doors opened. The bailiff called out, "All parties in Peachtree Development versus Donovan and other respondents, please proceed to courtroom C." As they entered the imposing courtroom, Emily noticed the 5-person legal team from Caldwell and Barnes arranging themselves at the plaintiff's table like chess pieces. Behind them sat an older man with silver hair and cold eyes, Edward Peachtree himself. Judge Harrison was already seated, reviewing papers with a frown that deepened when Emily entered. She'd never appeared in his courtroom during her time at the firm, but she knew his reputation. Efficient, impatient, and known for favoring development over preservation. Emily found her place at the defendant's table, arranging her documents with methodical care. The other neighborhood residents huddled nervously in the gallery behind her. She caught Miss Gladys's encouraging nod, Mr. Jameson's worried smile. As the proceedings began, Emily's mind drifted back to the night 3 months ago when her journey to this moment truly began. The community meeting at Summerhill Baptist Church had been packed with anxious homeowners, many already clutching Peachtree settlement checks. "They're saying we don't have a choice," Mrs. Washington had said, her voice trembling. "That eminent domain gives them the right." Emily had listened, blood boiling, as the Peachtree representative, a young man in an expensive suit, explained how progress couldn't be stopped. But they were being more than generous. That night, after everyone had gone home, Emily had sat alone in her grandmother's study, surrounded by family photo albums and faded newspaper clippings. Her grandmother, Emily Donovan, had been a community historian, meticulously documenting Summerhill's rich past as one of Atlanta's oldest historically black neighborhoods, established by formerly enslaved people after the Civil War. "The truth is in the details, Emily," her grandmother always said, and so Emily had begun to dig. For weeks, she'd spent every spare moment at the Atlanta History Center, the County Records Office, and the Georgia State Archives. She'd taken personal days from her part-time job at the community garden to travel to the state capitol, searching for the legislative records of the 1998 Property Act. What she discovered, buried in H. subsection 47B of the amendment, was extraordinary. Properties with documented historical significance to marginalized communities were eligible for special preservation status, requiring additional review beyond standard eminent domain proceedings. The provision had never been successfully invoked, likely because few people knew it existed, It had been added by a retiring black state senator as a last act before leaving office, tucked into a larger bill primarily concerned with commercial zoning. Emily still remembered the moment she found it, sitting in a dusty corner of the state archives. Her hands had trembled as she photocopied the relevant sections. But documentation of the law was only half the battle. She also needed to prove Summerhill's historical significance beyond dispute. That search led her to interview community elders, unearth church records, and spend countless hours cross-referencing census data. The breakthrough came when she discovered her own great-grandmother's journal in a box in the attic. Amelia Donovan had been a civil rights activist in the 1960s, and her house, Emily's house, had served as an unofficial meeting place for organizers during the Atlanta sit-ins. Amelia's journal contained not only her personal accounts, but also letters from prominent civil rights leaders, thanking her for providing a safe haven in Summerhill. These documents, combined with photographs and newspaper clippings, created an undeniable record of historical significance. Emily had compiled everything meticulously into what became her leather binder, creating 3 distinct exhibits: the legal basis for preservation, Exhibit A; the documented historical significance of Summerhill, Exhibit B; and the evidence of her own home's particular importance to civil rights history, Exhibit C. What she hadn't included in her filed documents, what she'd saved for this very day, was the bombshell in Exhibit C, a photograph showing a young Edward Peachtree among counter-protesters opposing integration, standing on the very street he now sought to demolish. All rise for the Honorable Judge William Harrison. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Harrison took his seat, his expression already set in what Emily recognized as his business face. He shuffled papers, adjusted his glasses, and then looked up, eyes scanning the room before settling first on the Caldwell and Barnes team, then, with noticeably less warmth, on Emily. In the matter of Peachtree Development Corporation versus Donovan et al., I see we have counsel for the plaintiff. He nodded toward the impressive row of attorneys. And Ms. Donovan is representing herself? His tone made the question sound like an accusation. Yes, Your Honor, Emily replied, standing with perfect posture. Pro se representation. Thomas Caldwell rose smoothly. Your Honor, before we begin, we'd like to note that we've made multiple generous settlement offers to the remaining defendants. We believe today's proceedings are unnecessary and a waste of the court's valuable time. Judge Harrison nodded sympathetically. So noted, Mr. Caldwell. Miss Donovan, are you aware that you're facing one of the state's premier legal teams in a matter that has already been approved by the City Planning Commission? Emily remained steady. I am, Your Honor. However, and you still believe you can adequately represent not only yourself, but essentially the interests of an entire neighborhood? The judge interrupted, his voice carrying a hint of mockery. A few chuckles rose from the plaintiff's table. Emily ignored them. I'm prepared to present evidence regarding the historical significance of Summerhill under subsection 47B of the Georgia Property Act Amendments of 1998, which would exempt. Judge Harrison waved his hand dismissively. Yes, I've reviewed your filing, Miss Donovan. While I appreciate your— He paused, searching for a word. Enthusiasm, this court has limited time. Emily tried again. Your Honor, if you'd look at Exhibit A in my filing— Miss Donovan, the judge's voice sharpened, this isn't a classroom where you can lecture us on obscure legal theories you've discovered in your— His eyes fell to her worn binder. Research. The courtroom grew uncomfortably quiet. Rebecca Wellington smirked, whispering something to a colleague who poorly suppressed a laugh. Judge Harrison leaned forward, his finger pointing directly at Emily. His voice rose, filling the courtroom. You're a joke. playing lawyer when real people's livelihoods and the future of Atlanta are at stake. This development will bring jobs, tax revenue, and progress to an area that desperately needs it. Emily stood perfectly still, absorbing the verbal assault. "Your Honor," Thomas Caldwell interjected smoothly, "perhaps we could move for summary judgment?" "I'm inclined to agree," Judge Harrison replied, "unless there's some miraculous evidence Miss Donovan has been hiding." Emily raised her head slowly. "Actually, Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit C." The bailiff carried Emily's Exhibit C to Judge Harrison, who took it with visible reluctance. The large courtroom remained perfectly silent, the tension palpable as the judge's eyebrows furrowed while examining the contents. "Your Honor," Emily said, her voice stronger now, "subsection 47B of the 1998 Property Act Amendment specifically states that properties with documented historical significance to marginalized communities require special preservation review before eminent domain proceedings may be finalized." Judge Harrison looked up, annoyance warring with confusion on his face. "Miss Donovan, I'm familiar with the Property Act." "With respect, Your Honor, few people are familiar with subsection 47B, Emily countered, stepping out from behind her table. "It was added by Senator James Marshall just before his retirement and has never been successfully invoked in court." "Your Honor," Emily said, reclaiming the moment, "I may have left the legal profession, but I never stopped believing in justice. The law is clear. Subsection 47B requires additional review for historically significant properties. Summerhill qualifies." The judge nodded slowly, then turned to the Caldwell and Barnes team. "Counsel, your response to Ms. Donovan's motion?" Thomas Caldwell stood, visibly regrouping. "Your Honor, while Miss Donovan's historical research is interesting, we maintain that the city's eminent domain authority supersedes any obscure subsection." Emily smiled slightly. "Your Honor, if Mr. Caldwell questions their authenticity, I've brought the originals, verified by the Georgia Historical Society just last week." Judge Harrison raised his hand. "That won't be necessary just yet." He paused, studying Emily thoughtfully. "It seems I may have underestimated you, Miss Donovan." "Many people do, Your Honor," Emily replied quietly. "It's an advantage I've learned to use wisely." After a 15-minute recess to review the evidence, Judge Harrison returned to the bench with a composure markedly different from his earlier demeanor. The gallery had grown, word having spread through the courthouse about the unexpected drama unfolding in Courtroom C. "Having reviewed the evidence presented by Ms. Donovan," he began, "I find that subsection 47B of the 1998 Property Act Amendment does indeed apply to this case. The historical significance of Summerhill has been substantively documented." Emily maintained her composure, though her heart raced. Behind her, she heard Miss Gladys's soft, "Praise the Lord." "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I find Mr. Peachtree's undisclosed personal history with the neighborhood constitutes a conflict of interest that should have been declared during initial proceedings." Edward Peachtree's face darkened with anger, but he remained silent as his lawyers exchanged worried glances. "Therefore, I am issuing an immediate stay on all eminent domain proceedings related to the Summerhill properties, pending a full historical preservation review as required by state law." The gavel struck with finality. Emily closed her eyes briefly, relief washing through her. "Miss Donovan," Judge Harrison added, "I owe you an apology for my earlier remarks. You've represented yourself and your community with exceptional skill and thoroughness." "Thank you, Your Honor," Emily replied. As the courtroom erupted in excited conversation, Emily turned to her neighbors. Miss Gladys embraced her, tears streaming down her lined face. Mr. Jameson pumped her hand enthusiastically. "You did it, child. You really did it." From the plaintiff's table, Thomas Caldwell approached, his expression complex. "Impressive work, Emily," he said stiffly. "Though this is only a temporary setback, we'll appeal." Emily nodded. "I know, and I'll be ready." Beyond Caldwell, she saw Edward Peachtree storming out, refusing to look at anyone. The battle wasn't over, but the first victory, proving that the law could protect communities when wielded by those who truly understood it, belonged to Emily and Summerhill. 1 year later, Emily stood in her garden harvesting tomatoes as the afternoon sun warmed her shoulders. The historic preservation designation for Summerhill had been finalized 6 months ago, after a thorough review that acknowledged the neighborhood's vital role in Atlanta's civil rights history. Peachtree Development had eventually withdrawn their appeal, redirecting their project to an already commercialized area nearby. More importantly, 3 other historically black neighborhoods had successfully invoked subsection 47B to protect their own communities. Emily's simple wooden gate creaked open. Rebecca Wellington stepped into the garden, looking distinctly different in jeans and a casual blouse. "The legal clinic's getting busy," she said, accepting a tomato from Emily with a smile. "2 more neighborhoods need consultation." After the trial, Rebecca had left Caldwell and Barnes, joining Emily to establish the Summerhill Community Law Project. Together, they offered pro bono services to vulnerable communities facing similar battles. 1 year later, Emily stood in her garden harvesting tomatoes as the afternoon sun warmed her shoulders. The historic preservation designation for Summerhill had been finalized 6 months ago, after a thorough review that acknowledged the neighborhood's vital role in Atlanta's civil rights history. Peachtree Development had eventually withdrawn their appeal, redirecting their project to an already commercialized area nearby. More importantly, 3 other historically black neighborhoods had successfully invoked subsection 47B to protect their own communities. Emily's simple wooden gate creaked open. Rebecca Wellington stepped into the garden, looking distinctly different in jeans and a casual blouse. "The legal clinic's getting busy," she said, accepting a tomato from Emily with a smile. 2 more neighborhoods need consultation." After the trial, Rebecca had left Caldwell and Barnes, joining Emily to establish the Summerhill Community Law Project. Together, they offered pro bono services to vulnerable communities facing similar battles.